Thanks for listening to Creative Control. While I have you here, please consider supporting Youth Empowerment and Support Services, otherwise known as YES. Based in Edmonton, Alberta, YES provides immediate and low-barrier overnight and day shelter, temporary supportive housing, and individualized wraparound supports for young people aged 15 to 24. They work collaboratively within a network of care focused on the prevention of youth homelessness by providing youth with the necessary supports to stabilize their housing, improve their well-being, build life skills, connect with community, and avoid re-entry into homelessness. Learn more about how to donate or otherwise support YES by visiting yess.org.
My name is Frank Silvestri. I'm from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, not a Canadian. And Philly's really close to New Jersey, by the way. And I'm here to talk to you about why I am a Patreon supporter of Vish Khanna's Creative Control podcast, the unique long-form exploration of music, comedy, art, geography, and so much more. Vish is an incredible interviewer who has a charming, disarming, funny, reverently irreverent style, which feels a lot more like a conversation with friends than a podcast interview. These conversations have included talking to people like Jeff Tweedy, Nels Klein, Ira Kaplan, Dan Romano, Carson McHone, the White Hot Lung, Juliana Rialino, and one of my all-time favorites, the Sadies. So if you're like me and you find these kind of conversations vital, essential, and important, I hope you'll join me in supporting Creative Control on Patreon.
To make your flexible monthly donation to Creative Control, please visit patreon.com/Creative Control today.
Ted Leo is a well-respected and prolific songwriter, musician, and singer based in his hometown, Bloomfield, New Jersey. After playing in punk bands like Chisel and Sin Eaters, and living in Indiana for a spell, Leo moved to Washington, D.C., and in 1999 formed the excellent band Ted Leo and the Pharmacists. To commemorate the 20th anniversary of their fourth album, 2004's Shake the Sheets, the band is spending a good chunk of 2024 playing the record front to back on tour. This occasion, coupled with the release of a new single by the Foreign Correspondents, a supergroup featuring Leo, Sohrab Habibian, Brendan Canty, and Michael Hampton, interpreting two songs by Canadian power pop master Michael Pagliaro, enabled Ted and I to connect for a lovely conversation covering topics like moving back to New Jersey after decades living other places, the enduring influence of Bruce Springsteen and the realistic aspects of the Sopranos, punk rock influences and dark songs living in sunny arrangements, loving the early Beatles and being a part of the Dischord Records community, dense lyricism in rock and hip-hop, the isolation and exhaustion that inspired Shake the Sheets, and its contemporary resonance, how the Foreign Correspondents came about, and why more people might want to listen to Michael Pagliaro, touring more, other future plans, and much more. Part of the Lionsgate Sound Network, with the support of listeners like you, who follow and subscribe to this listener-supported and donor-driven podcast. Spread the word about it. Leave nice reviews and ratings on your podcast platform if you have a moment, and make flexible monthly donations at patreon.com/Creative Control, which is the primary and most reliable way for a podcaster like me, specifically, to make a living. This is my primary source of income. And where a $6 subscription a month means you can access every single episode of this show in its entirety, which is not the case without that $6 monthly subscription. And that's the case with this particular episode. All amounts are welcome. You can learn more about how you'd like to support the show on Patreon if you're able to, again, at patreon.com/Creative Control. And once again, that'll enable you to hear this entire conversation I had with Ted and many others. So thank you in advance for your support. It means a lot. With additional support from Blackbird Music, a wonderful independent record store with bricks and mortar locations in Edmonton and Calgary, Alberta, and a great website, blackbird.ca, where you can order records shipped to your house or put on hold for you if you can get to the bricks and mortar locations. Again, learn more about how to order records by Ted Leo and the Pharmacists, and his other bands possibly. Blackbird.ca for more info. Plus in-kind support from independent businesses like Pizza Trocadero, The Bookshelf, and Planet Bean Coffee, respectively, in Guelph, Ontario, and Granddad's Donuts in Hamilton, Ontario. This is episode 878 of Creative Control, featuring the lovely and talented Ted Leo, with your host, me, Vish Khanna. Please enjoy this excerpt from our conversation, and to hear the whole thing, again, subscribe to the show at patreon.com/creativecontrol. If there are famous New Jersey exports, are you yourself particularly proud of any of them? And you can't mention yourself. I don't think you would have. But are there ones that you're like, yeah, when that happened or when that phenomenon occurred, we were all like, yeah, this is great. Is there anything you can think of?
Yeah, I think so. I think almost any time, to be honest with you. Like, when you grow up here, obviously kind of your first hero is Springsteen. That's like, and then even if you go through your punk phase of like rejecting Springsteen, you still have to contend with Springsteen. It's like, it's impossible to avoid. And then usually, even if you have gone through your punk phase of rejecting Springsteen, you come back around to Springsteen.
I mean, arguably, he was pretty punk in his own way and the own uncompromising way of writing and trying to help people with his massive tours. I just finished Stephen Hyden's new book about Born in the USA. I don't know if you're familiar with this, but I mean, sorry, just so we're clear, I've seen Bruce Springsteen and or the E Street Band many times, and I grew up liking him, but also had what you're talking about as I got into underground music. But then my underground music friends were like, listening to The River and Darkness on the Edge of Town. I'm like, what's happening? What's going on? Because he's there's a mainstream guy. But then you listen to those records, you're like, yeah, this is in line with Hoover records in some way, or the records that we, like the Dischord.
Absolutely.
Like there's some commonality there, even though the rock people might bristle at the punk people and the hardcore punk people would bristle at the Springsteen, but I was right there, and I just want to position myself like I love him and have been recently re-immersing myself in his work because of Stephen's book. So I just want to mention that I too love the man and have seen him many times.
I do.
Yeah,
I do too. And I think an interesting for me kind of through line with Springsteen was, of course, being like a teenager in the 80s, the way that Born in the USA was co-opted, by all things American exceptional and American nationalism and right wing and etc. Having largely my experience of that song be through the radio and through MTV and etc. I didn't do any deep dives with it until a little bit later when somebody first says to you, you know what that's about, right?
Yeah.
Like, actually, I'm not sure I do. And then you dig into it and you're like, oh, yeah, all right, this is an or it's not an anti-Vietnam War song. It's a song about the destruction of the industrial base in America and what those returning from Vietnam came home to face and, et cetera. And it does sort of fit right in with a certain punk worldview.
7 top 10 singles, massive album, comes out in 1984, but I would argue each of those 7 top 10 singles are all mired in isolation, alienation, depression, tough stuff, and very complicated guy. And I think, and not to dwell too much into this, because I'm supposed to talk to Stephen, and I haven't yet, Ted, so please forgive me if I'm making you my Bruce Springsteen book proxy right now, but it's just fascinating that he was so misunderstood, as you just mentioned. Like, people didn't get it, that he finally got the popularity and fame that he was probably owed. And then by the next album, Tunnel of Love, clearly rejected it all, because I think partially because he was just so misconstrued and misunderstood by the very huge popular, becoming popular actually made him more alienated and more misunderstood. Anyway, I don't know if... Yeah,
that's why I started covering Dancing in the Dark, I don't know, 25 years ago.
Yeah,
purposely playing it only solo and like really kind of stark and cold and quietly, you know, because that's like, to me, like that exact kind of alienation, you know, that you were talking about is what's at the core of that song. And it's interesting, even like production wise, everything on Born in the USA is huge and 80s and lends itself to, and it lends itself to, let's not say misinterpretation, but to just not interpreting it. You know, it lends itself to just being part of the wash of big hits.
Superficial. It lends itself to superficial listening, maybe.
Yeah.
Like there's just something. It's so upbeat, but then if you actually dial into what's being said, I mean, that's it's quite ingenious in its own way for those reasons. I think. Yeah. So
anyway.
so sorry. Yeah, he was he was or is an influence on you on some level.
I mean, I suppose on some level he's an influence. I don't necessarily think that Bruce is a real specific musical influence. You know, possibly in the way I think about writing, which is, you know, less about, you know, pinning a set of lyrics to an issue than to how people are living through the issues that I want to talk about. You know, like that would probably be a way in which I'm sure that on some level Bruce influenced me.
Yeah, and this might be a nice segue into a discussion about the 20th anniversary of Shake the Sheets, this album. Congratulations on this anniversary, if I may say.
on living this long.
It's a funny thing, right? You didn't really, I'm congratulating you on something that just happened. You didn't really do anything. Exactly, it's just like, the clock ticked by. Thanks, I was here. Yes, no, I mean... Right. I want to ask you about your mindset there. Like, I want to revisit this record with you since you are about to tour behind this record. But just following up on the Springsteen thing, I just want to say that I spent a lot of time listening to this album again, and I decided I would read along to the lyrics based on whatever I found on the internet. And I was really astonished by the wordiness of it, and I was astonished by your phrasing. Like, I would be reading, and I'm like, how's he going to get all of this out? And then you would do these little beautiful line readings, beautiful singing, like just like tags and stuff. It was just really, I just think it's really brilliant, brilliantly put together.
Thank you.
When we talk about someone like Springsteen or someone who tends to write a lot, and sometimes densely but subtly at the same time, is this record a reflection of maybe someone like him having an influence you as a songwriter at all? Or do you have other influences that might, like you were just talking about some of the storytelling, and like I was reading someone's explanation about Me and Mia, and I'm like, wow. And I'll let you explain all of these things yourself there, Ted, but I just thought that was a very interesting way of telling a story about something that a lot of people go through and a lot of people deal with. Anyway, back to my original question. Do you think Springsteen or his ilk was a particular influence on your wordiness, your lyrical choices? Can we start there?
Yeah. It's hard for me to say yes to that, but I would also absolutely leave the door open that, you know, again, Springsteen for me is someone who is in the air and the water here, so that means it's probably in my DNA at this point, is it right? Epigenetically, at least anyway.
Yeah.
And I do think that, you know, all right, funny. I'm sorry to just digress for a second, but
no, go ahead.
I will say that, you know, a number of years after Shake the Sheets came out, I went back through like another big listening to Springsteen phase. And some of the longer and songs like I Came For You, or, you know, some of the hits that weren't like the giantest hits, like Promised Land, you know, things like that, like they were resonating with me in a big way. And I think that there are definite similarities between that sort of stuff and what I was writing on Shake the Sheets, and probably the next record, Living with the Living, maybe those two more so than some of my other records. You know, but it's a little bit of a chicken and egg thing with all of this. Like, again, I'm not trying to be coy and like say that, oh no, it's Springsteen's not an influence, but it definitely wasn't a conscious influence. There were other things that I was thinking about, which I'm sure we can talk about, that were more conscious influences, but the way that stuff keeps coming back and like finding new resonance with me, I'm sure it was in there. And I'm sure that, after years of touring on my own songs of Shake the Sheets, it probably like is partly what like opened me back up to listening to that Springsteen stuff again, if that makes any sense.
Absolutely. Hey, thanks for listening to Creative Control, as always. As you may have heard me mention, I recently lost my day job, and I've had a few conversations with people since who've said, you had a day job? I thought your podcast was your day job. When I explained why it hasn't been my day job to a friend, he suggested I should share some of this information with people like you listening right now. So, in short, unless they have some giant exclusive $1 million contract, podcasters are not paid to make stuff by companies like Apple and Spotify. Podcasters do not make any money from streaming royalties. Ad revenue is dependent on a certain threshold of downloads each month, and even if your show is accessed 30,000 times a month, the income you get is actually really minimal. So podcasters like me usually make time in our lives to support our communities and our interests to make these shows, and our most reliable source of income for this work is in fact crowdfunding. In my case, it's my Patreon. So if you'd like to receive ad-free episodes earlier than everyone else, regular newsletters and blog posts, bonus audio content, and support my work, quite literally, please visit patreon.com/creativecontrol today. Thank you so much for listening to this excerpt from a recent episode of Creative Control with Vish Khanna. Every other Creative Control episode is only accessible to Patreon supporters. This is one of them. So please visit patreon.com/creativecontrol, become a subscriber today, and you won't miss a single episode in its entirety. There are links in the show notes to take you right there. So if you're able to, please do support this show and enjoy hours and hours of conversation. Thank you.